Hello and welcome. We're going to have a beautiful program today. Very important film that we all saw called Elie Wiesel, Soul on Fire, by the brilliant filmmaker Oren Rudowski, who is our guest of honor today. We have well, we're featuring, of course, the story of somebody who was an icon. He was more than a Holocaust survivor. He was more than a writer, even more than a Nobel laureate. He was somebody who still has today, a certain level of moral authority that we turned to during his lifetime and that we continue to turn to in our own time. So, um, in addition to Oren, we will be joined in a recording by one of Elie Wiesel's students. Her name is Ingrid Anderson. She unfortunately was unable to be here with us live, but she has sent a lovely recording. And our other panelist is also our moderator, and that is Dr. Judd Newborn, who moderates and speaks on many of our programs. He is the world's authority on the White Rose student resistance movement and in general on resistance during World War II. He knew Elie Wiesel, and he's here to guide us during today's program. But before we get going, I want to say that we have a bit of news, and that is that next summer, for the second summer in a row, we will be offering a really interesting program in Portugal for teachers. We will be in residence at the Aristides de Sousa Mendes Museum in Cabanas de Viriato, Portugal. And we will take teachers all over the country to Lisbon, to Porto, to little villages, to the town in the mountains where the hidden Jews of Portugal lived for 500 years. It's called the Educators Institute in Portugal of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. We are putting a link in the chat box if you are a teacher or you know a teacher and you would like to join us. Space is limited. We only are going to accept 20 people. So if you truly are interested, I wouldn't wait. Finally, I want to say that we don't recognize raised hands. If you do have a question, please write it into the chat box, and later in the program, we will get to as many of your questions as we can. Right now, I'm going to throw the floor to my dear friend and colleague, today's moderator, Dr. Judd Newborn.
Olivia, thank you very much. This is a wonderful and important program with an extraordinary and artful, profound film to go with it. Now, during the Holocaust, many Jews in the ghettos and camps, desperately cut off from the world, and the world cut off from them, had an urgent, burning need to bear witness to details of their suffering and that of their people. Details they knew in the death camps especially, were unprecedented in the history of humankind and unbelievable in their diabolical extremity. Indeed, a common response by many death camp survivors when asked afterwards to describe the hellish reality of Auschwitz-Birkenau would start by saying, "How can I? Um, if if a Jew is lucky to survive, to be able to tell you they couldn't, because Auschwitz was like no place on earth. Auschwitz was another planet." And so Jews throughout Europe felt a growing, burning compulsion to bear witness to the terrible details of the persecution they were undergoing. And so bearing witness became a phrase, a necessity, a mission during the Holocaust, whether they were to survive or not. There are many who did so, as we know, more than we will ever find out, because the efforts of so many are lost to history and memory. And only because the Nazis had been defeated do we have these memories. Both children and adults found ways and multiple ways to bear witness in diaries, through music, through clandestine artwork, like the poignant pictures drawn by the children of the ghetto camp Theresienstadt, 4,000 colorful pictures, as well as drawings documenting the horrible conditions, found hidden away and miraculously after the war, and after 15,000 of those children had been murdered. Jews did so through Emanuel Ringelblum's collective Warsaw Eineg Shabbos documentation project. Indeed, Jews sought to bear witness through every mode of cultural expression possible. So urgent was their need not to be forgotten that they took every method possible to record their experiences. Chaim Kaplan, in his Warsaw Ghetto Diary, which he smuggled out before being deported to Treblinka, said this: "In the spiritual state like the one in which I find myself at this time, it is difficult to hold a pen, to concentrate one's thoughts. But a strange idea has stuck in my head since the war broke out, that it is a duty I must perform. This idea is like a flame imprisoned in my bones, burning within me, screaming, 'Record!' Yes, another soul on fire who did not survive, as did most." This necessity to bear witness, welling up from their very being, was meant to counter the chilling words of the SS, who took pleasure, as one camp survivor recounted, and I quote, "in telling us that we had no chance of coming out alive," a point they emphasized with particular relish by insisting that after the war, the rest of the world would not believe what happened. There would be rumors, speculation, but no clear evidence, and people would conclude that evil on such a scale was just not possible. And so one of the four Auschwitz Sonderkommando, or special squads, those slaves responsible for cremating their own brethren before being consigned themselves every 3 months to the flames, bore witness by actually stuffing manuscripts in bottles and burying them like desperate messages amidst the sea of ashes of the crematoria grounds, hoping that someday they might come to the surface, wash ashore. "Dear finder," one of them said in Yiddish, "search everywhere, in every inch of soil. Tens of documents are buried under it, mine and those of other persons. Great quantities of teeth are also buried here. It is we, the crematoria workers, who expressly have strewn them all over the terrain, as many as we could, so that the world should find material traces of the millions of murdered people. We ourselves have lost all hope of being able to see the moment of liberation." But there were those Jews who did survive the ghettos and camps, despite all odds, after being liberated, continued by publishing almost immediately the first handful of indispensable memoirs, such as Elie Wiesel's Night. However, perhaps the majority of survivors for decades afterwards, some guilt-ridden for having lived when others perished, and when being a victim of the Nazis was considered shameful, not laudable, and even heroic, as the term survivor has come to be. They kept their experiences bottled up, wanting only to get on with their lives. But during this period, there also emerged a handful of those who felt compelled to speak out when others could not. Among them was one extraordinary survivor who could not have remained silent even if he had wished to. Someone who spoke out, whether or not anyone would listen. A man who became the most famously eloquent of all. A man who epitomized the need to bear witness. And that, of course, was Elie Wiesel. Today, taking our cues from the profound and beautiful documentary you've just seen, or you will see by the end of Monday, we're going to explore what we can about Wiesel, this world-weary but insistent, tireless man, this soul on fire, as the title of this documentary film so aptly describes him. Now, before we get to that, Olivia has asked me to mention some of the ways in which two crucial public moments in Elie Wiesel's life and my own public as well as personal experiences dovetail, one about Bitburg and the other about Bosnia. Now, I knew Elie in a very limited personal way, beginning in 1986, when I was recruited to help create New York's Holocaust Museum, the Museum of Jewish Heritage, and I connected with him now and then until a couple of years before his death. But even before that, our public paths crossed in a way. It was in 1985, the 40th anniversary of the end of World War II, that Germany's Chancellor Helmut Kohl invited President Ronald Reagan to make a symbolic state visit with him to the Bitburg Military Cemetery, where German soldiers were buried, as a way of together affirming how Germany and the US had long become warm allies. Coincidentally, Elie was to be presented with the Presidential Medal of Honor just shortly thereafter. And in the meantime, a controversy had swelled because SS troops who had participated in the mass murder of Jews were also buried in Bitburg. The president did not want to cave into pressure, and his knowledge was shallow about the Holocaust. And so, in justifying his visit, he naively equated the German soldiers buried there to the as victims of Nazism, to the Jews who were murdered by the Nazis in Europe. So Elie, who had become a guardian of memory of the Holocaust, realized he was facing one of those pivotal moments of moral choice, such as we all must encounter during the course of our lives, whether big or small. So he decided, as we'll see, to speak truth to power, and those were his words, saying, "This is not your place, choose another place." I was already on the verge of publishing a book about Hans and Sophie Scholl of the White Rose student anti-Nazi resistance. They chose to risk their own lives by speaking truth to power themselves, uh, ultimately by making the only public protest against Nazism to occur in the 12 years of Hitler's rule, by scattering their sixth leaflet in the hundreds down over the heads of students in the atrium of the University of Munich. And for that, they were captured and beheaded. A group of citizens led by Dick Gregory, the comedian and activist, and Bella Abzug and others, decided they would choose another site to, as Elie had asked, to visit, and they chose to make a protest pilgrimage to the graves of the White Rose students. This was where Ronald Reagan might have gone. So in the meantime, I had lauded the White Rose in an opinion piece I published in, I believe, the Chicago Tribune. I can't quite remember. But I said that the voices of the White Rose echo today in the choice of which site to honor. So Elie Wiesel, several times in the course of the years, asked me to send him additional copies of the book on the White Rose. And he understood that they were upstanders, not the bystanders whose indifference to the suffering of others he felt was more hurtful even to the survivors than those who perpetrated the deed. Now, in 1993, Elie once again faced a very public moment of moral choice. The Serbian fascists were perpetrating ethnic cleansing on Bosnia and its mostly Muslim population in the Balkans. Elie had visited and seen what was going on. So at the dedication of the U.S. Holocaust Museum, as we're going to see, with President Bill Clinton in the front row, he said he could not stay silent yet again and urged the president to change his mind and take action against these atrocities. And I experienced a challenging moment of moral choice myself about the same atrocities. In 1995, one of the three entities sponsoring an already organized program at the UN brought me in last minute, dividing the program in two and fitting me in to give what I believe was the first lecture on the Holocaust ever held at the United Nations, breaking a long-time Arab bloc barrier. The subject I chose was Jewish anti-Nazi resistance. And this was taking place just after the fall of Srebrenica in Bosnia, when the UN, holding fast to an arms embargo, stood by while the well-armed Serbian fascists attacked and perpetrated a bloodbath against the unarmed Bosnians. So for 3 days, I struggled with myself. I knew I was supposed to stay in the past, to be diplomatic, as it were, which meant, of course, not to say anything of substance in regard to current events. I knew my host would be surprised and angry, but I decided I would not be able to look myself in the mirror again if I did not take this opportunity. And so, in the middle of my lecture, when I said, "Let's light a symbolic candle for the Jewish freedom fighters of the Warsaw Ghetto, abandoned by the world," I then said, "And let's light this candle also for the Bosnians of Srebrenica mass murdered the other day while the UN stood idly by. And let's hope when you do your post-mortem this coming Friday, you finally decide to do something." Then I continued with my lecture. As expected, Secretary General Boutros Boutros-Ghali, who had heard my lecture broadcast into the Secretariat, was outraged. So, with this, let us proceed with our program as I introduce our special guests. Our first guest is Oren Rudovsky, the writer, director, and producer of Elie Wiesel, Soul on Fire. A recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and several grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities and for the Arts, he has produced such essential films as Hiding and Seeking, about those few but extraordinary altruistic Poles who saved their Jewish neighbors despite the risks to their own lives, and his early widely acclaimed documentary with the late Menachem Daum, A Life Apart, Hasidism in America, which was shortlisted for an Academy Award. Ingrid Anderson, our other guest, unexpectedly could not be with us live, so she has sent us comments she pre-recorded only last night. A devoted student of Elie Wiesel and now the associate director of the Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies at Boston University, where he taught. She is a scholar of Jewish studies, specializing in modern and contemporary Jewish theology, philosophy, and political thought, and teaches courses on Jewish masculinity and post-Holocaust ethics. She has a doctoral degree in religious studies from Boston University and is one of those who speaks in the documentary. So, Oren, greetings.
Thank
Come and
you.
say hello to us all.
It's a pleasure to be here, Judd and Olivia and all of you listening in. I'm honored to be here to talk about the making of Elie Wiesel Soul on Fire. And let me tell you a little bit about how the making of the film came to be, because as a documentary filmmaker, one makes films because one has a burning passion for something, or one reads an article in the paper and follows up on it, or somebody approaches you to make a film, and in a way, those are all gifts given to a documentary filmmaker. In this case, I was approached. I got an email from Professor Annette Insdorf, who teaches at Columbia University and has written books about film, and a book about film and the Holocaust specifically, and had been and continued to be a longtime friend of Elie Wiesel and Marion Wiesel and their son Elisha Wiesel. And Elie Wiesel passed away in 2016. He was born in 1928, passed away in 2016. And the family and Elie, when he was alive, had been approached by many people to make a film about his memoir Night. And he said definitively he did not believe anybody should or could take a memoir about the Holocaust and put it into dramatize it. He had very strong feelings about the Holocaust series from the mid 70s, wrote a famous editorial in the New York Times condemning that film. We can talk about that later because it influenced a lot of people to talk about the Holocaust, but he felt like it trivialized the Holocaust. So he, in his lifetime, did not want, and said, after I pass, I don't want a film made from Night. But his family thought that a film about he himself, Elie Wiesel, would be important in a world which was forgetting the lessons that were important to Elie Wiesel, which we'll go into, I'm sure, over the course of this discussion. And I just want to say a few things just in response to Judd. Or one thing is just the Bitburg ceremony. The medal he received was a Congressional Gold Medal. That's what it actually was. And my film starts with a quote, which really responds, Judd, to what you were saying about the drive and the need for many survivors to speak up and for many to keep quiet for a variety of reasons. And Elie, after the Holocaust, he said, "I will not write about my experience for 10 years. I need to assimilate that experience, to understand it, and the time is not now." And so the book, his memoir Night, came out in first in Yiddish, in a much longer version, and then in French after in 1958, and then was translated into English in a much slimmer, barely over 100-page volume. Our film begins with a quote which responds to what you were talking about, and which really speaks to our audience and all the audiences I'm trying to reach, which is, whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness. And that becomes incredibly meaningful in an era when there are fewer and fewer survivors of the Holocaust left. And so I just wanted to, uh, I'm going to intersperse my remarks with some clips from the film. And the first one will give you a sense, we'll talk about it afterwards, but it's not necessarily what you expect. This is the opening few moments of the film.
Elie spent most of his life looking for the shadows, seeking out the darkness, in the hope that he could do something about it.
Thank you. So I just wanted to introduce that clip because it introduces key points about who Elie Wiesel was. As a friend of his, Ted Koppel, in voiceover said, seeking out the darkness in the hope that he could do something about it, being the darkness in the world. That was his post-Holocaust life quest. And I would say he was driven like a soul on fire, which is that title. It comes from a book of his, which maybe we'll discuss later, called Souls on Fire. But that was an essential message. The form of telling that story is hand painted or hand drawn animation on glass that a wonderful animator named Joel Orloff did, and was one of the early things that we did in the film. And I wanted to introduce the film not as a typical documentary, but that one that is getting inside Elie Wiesel's head and is using his words to tell the story, his and as we'll see. Um, so, so Judd, I know you asked me to ask you this question.
Oh,
I don't need you to do that.
oh, okay.
But
Your
go.
techniques, though, your techniques are really very artful and creative. I was very stunned actually when I saw the use of animation. So yeah, please tell us.
Well, so what happened was, uh, and I was saying Annette Instorf, I didn't finish that part of the story. Um, Annette introduced me and Menachem Daum, who was my colleague, who unfortunately was not so well and had to drop out of the project early on, but introduced us to Marion Wiesel and to Alicia Wiesel, and introduced us by way of showing them our film Hiding and Seeking, which is a Holocaust-related film um, about the parents of Menachem's wife, who were hidden by righteous Gentiles, by Polish farmers during the Holocaust. Alicia Wiesel was very taken with that film and said, I want Menachem and Oren to make this film. And Marion was like, well, how are you going to make this film? How are you going to tell this story? And that, of course, is crucial to any film. Is how are you going to make it? Because you can. It's all in the how. And we said, and you know, my mother studied with Elie Wiesel at Boston University, where I grew up, and took courses with him. And we had his books around the house. And my strongest memory is of Elie Wiesel's voice and words. And I saw those books on the shelf, among them Night and Souls on Fire and Jews of Silence. And I said, and Menachem and I said, this film has to be narrated by Elie Wiesel. And then the first other thing I read, aside from the famous Bitburg speech, was I read from his autobiography. Elie Wiesel's autobiography starts out with dreams of his. And those dreams became a touchstone throughout the film for understanding internally what Elie Wiesel's struggle was with. And that leads us to the second clip.
Last night, I saw my mother in a dream. She seemed upset, and I realized that something serious had happened. She motioned me to follow her. Then I saw my father. He was wearing my gray suit. It looked good on him. We were all there, everyone from before and from now, standing at a river that all at once began to swell, its level rising from moment to moment. It's the flood, someone said quite calmly. It's the flood, but I am not afraid.
So I'm stopping at a point. I'm not letting you see that whole denouement of that animation purposely, because if you haven't seen the film, go watch the film in the next 2 days. But what's important there is, to me, is Elie's voice, his personal, beautiful voice that you have to lean into to understand. And everybody says, the first time you hear Elie's voice, you really have to listen, because he has this Hungarian, Romanian, French lilt to his gentle voice. He never shouted. He always spoke gently and intimately, and we sought out that intimacy of that voice. The other thing essential is, again, that animation, which is a technique of painting on glass, which is borrowed really from wonderful, brilliant South African Jewish animator William Kentridge, who drew with charcoal on paper. We painted on glass and pour water on it, you see, so the paint dissolves. And to me, it evokes something very important to Elie Wiesel, which is memory. And his memory, where does it begin and end? Always with his family, with his parents, with his hometown. And the film revolves backwards and forwards to his hometown and to his father and to his family. Those are touchstones for him throughout his life. And that is how we began our journey into the life of Elie Wiesel, not to cover every aspect of his life, because we leave out many significant chapters of his life purposefully, because we wanted to focus in depth on those segments of his life which told the arc of that story, from happy childhood in Sighet, the trauma of the Holocaust, and on to what becomes a quite meaningful, beautiful life. And yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have another clip now, aren't we?
Yes, we're going to have another clip, and this clip takes us way after, later in his life. The film, after these memories, takes us back to his hometown of Sighet. It then takes us to that sudden departure, horrible departure of everybody in his town, and the bulk of Hungarian Jewry, which is deported between, I believe it's March and May of 1944, very late in the war. Clearly, Germany, the Nazis, were going to lose that war, and their true mission of killing, murdering the Jewish population became their seemingly sole goal. And Elie's taken away along with his family. We're not going to see that. We're jumping way ahead to when Elie is already a well-known figure, and we're jumping ahead to part of the Bitburg story that Judd brought up previously.
Could I interrupt for a second? Could you talk a little bit now about the import of Hasidism to Elie? Because instead of jumping right to Bitburg, obviously, did Hasidism, was he involved with Hasidism while he was in Sighet? Did his relationship to it change over the years? He ultimately wrote a book, which I believe Ingrid is going to talk about or mention in her pre-recorded tape, that the first book she read was not Night, but Souls on Fire, which was Hasidic tales through which he interwove his own take on things. So please tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, certainly. Well, that's something that Ingrid and I share, which is even though my parents had Night on the bookshelf and Jews of Silence, which is about his journey to the Soviet Union to meet the refuseniks and people who were seeking to practice their faith in the Soviet Union. The book that attracted me and was less daunting to me, I suppose, was Souls on Fire. And I would say, for my money, Elie Wiesel, you can see his lectures online at the 92nd Street Y archive, and I really recommend you all do that. You click on any segment of any one of those lectures, and you're totally drawn in. And often he is telling stories of Hasidic rabbis, and it's again in the how he tells these stories. And something else about Elie Wiesel, his sense of humor comes through in those lectures. Elie grew up in Sighet with his father's family. His grandfather was Hasidic, and his mother's family was less. They were still observant, but less from that community. But he was infused. I would say after the war, when he was in Paris for many years, and then he moved to the United States. He became friendly with the Lubavitch Rebbe and would visit him frequently. So his connection to Hasidism began in Sighet, and it never left him. It became a significant part of who he was and informs the way he tells stories, because Hasidic storytelling is its own kind of circular, mystical kind of storytelling, which I believe Elie, perfected to a remarkable art form. And it's on display also in Bitburg in the way that he, at much greater length than we're going to see here, talks to President Reagan. And we're also missing this remarkable scene in the Oval Office, which we found at the Boston University archives, in which you see the gentleness but the forcefulness with which President Reagan and Elie Wiesel speak to each other, a far cry from the world we live in today. But here's a little clip from his speech that was on national television as it happened, where he was presented with a Congressional Gold Medal. And then Reagan knew what he was going to say, but let him say it.
Mr. President, I wouldn't be the person I am, and you wouldn't respect me for what I am, if I were not to tell you also of the sadness that is in my heart for what happened during the last week. And I am sure that you too are sad for the same reasons. Our tradition commands us, quote, to speak truth to power. So may I speak to you, Mr. President, with respect and admiration. For I know of your commitment to humanity, and therefore I am convinced, as you have told us earlier when we spoke, that you were not aware of the presence of SS graves in the Bitburg Cemetery. Of course you didn't know. But now we all are aware. May I, Mr. President, if it's possible at all, implore you to do something else, to find a way, to find another way, another site. That place, Mr. President, is not your place.
I believe he did find, they did visit a concentration camp afterwards, didn't they, Oren?
Yes. What happened is that after the speech, it became clear, and there's a wonderful scene with the press conference with Elie, where uh, uh, George Bush approached, who was the vice president, was Reagan's vice president, ancient history to us now, um, and said, we are gonna go to the cemetery anyway, despite your pleas. I would argue that, and we're going to add Bergen-Belsen to the trip, which is famous for Anne Frank. Family, Anne Frank was taken to Bergen-Belsen, where she died of typhus. And they went there and they invited Elie Wiesel, who promptly said, absolutely not. I will not join this trip. And I would argue that even though Elie lost the battle of stopping Reagan from going to Bitburg, he won the war because his moral conviction and his words are what is most remembered from that trip. And he continued on to speak out. In the next year, he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he continued to speak out for those peoples whose lives were at risk, and most famously also in Bosnia. And I don't know if you want to set that up, Judd, any more than I have, but
Well, I actually already made some of my comments that yes, um, he made that visit before he was to be part of the dedication of the U.S. Holocaust Museum.
yeah,
So once again, he had this moment of truth, as he had with Reagan, and he took it.
with this time with Bill Clinton.
And we have learned that when people suffer, we cannot remain indifferent. And Mr. President, I cannot not tell you something. I have been in the former Yugoslavia last fall. I cannot sleep since. We must do something to stop the bloodshed in that country.
The number one lesson that I learned from him was your suffering is not what defines you, but it informs you. It can shape you. And then it's your job to make it the best tool that you can.
That's both Bosnia and Ingrid Anderson, who we're going to hear from in a minute. We have one more clip, but as Judd mentioned earlier, Ingrid was a student of Elie's at Boston University, where Elie taught for nearly 40 years, had thousands of students, each one of whom he met with privately. And we're going to we found this piece of footage that the filmmaker, Hungarian filmmaker Judit Elek, had shot in his classroom. Judit, wonderful filmmaker who made films about a lot of subjects, including Jewish life, and was herself interned briefly. The Jews of Budapest, actually, a lot of them survived, and she survived and became this prolific filmmaker. But she made a film about Elie Wiesel herself and filmed this material, which was never used in her own film. And we're going to hear a section of that, and then I guess it's going to lead right into Ingrid.
I do not believe that there could be, or even there should be, novels about the Holocaust. Either a novel is a novel, or it is not. And when it is about the Holocaust, it is not.
Et moi, je dois vous dire que je ne suis jamais aussi ému, jamais aussi conscient de ma responsabilité d'enseignant que lorsque je me trouve en face de ces enfants. Parce que je suis responsable de monde que je leur lègue et que j'ai détruit pour eux, que nous avons détruit pour eux. Et maintenant, à eux de le reconstruire sur des ruines.
He developed very strong relationships with all of his students. I saw them being transformed.
And we're going to go right into, did you want to say anything, Judd?
I want to say something after we see what Ingrid has to say.
Okay.
My name is Ingrid Anderson, and it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm sorry that I can't be there live. I'm in Dublin, actually, and my flight was delayed, so the timing didn't work out as I'd hoped. But I wanted to share some of my experiences with Professor Wiesel as his student, and to talk a little bit about why Oren's movie is so important to me and to the other students of Professor Wiesel's who were involved. The first books of his that I read were actually not Night or Holocaust related. They were his books on Chassidut and Hasidic masters, which, if you haven't read them, I totally recommend. They are so fantastic. And actually, I teach a seminar at Boston University on his work. And the first thing that we read in that class is Souls on Fire. And, you know, I did know a lot about Judaism and Jewish history before I read those books. I read them in a class that actually Wiesel taught on Hasidic masters. And again, those books were so profound. Even if you don't completely understand Hasidut or the role of Hasidism in Jewish history, Jewish thought, Jewish theology, they're profound even without all of that, which I loved. I loved his ability to use his particular experience to connect in universal ways with, you know, about universal problems and joys and realities. And it really kind of pushed me toward focusing on modern Jewish thought and contemporary Jewish thought in my later work. And that's now what I work on. I think that once I finally read Night, I'd probably been studying with him for a year, maybe two. And a lot of my colleagues just kept saying, I can't believe you haven't read it yet. I can't believe you haven't read it yet. And so many of them had read it in high school or middle school, and I just hadn't. And so I finally read it, and I was just really, I think that knowing him before having read it made it even more intense for me. You know, I remember him coming into the classroom before the high holidays and saying, you know, that this was the time of year when the Jews were deported from Siget. And you could really see that whenever this time of year came around, he was back there, even if it was just for a little bit. But he would talk about it anyway with us, because I think he hoped it would mean something, it would do something. And it did. He was right. It absolutely did. And so after I graduated and was teaching in my own classroom, I actually was lucky enough to get a full-time teaching position at Boston University. And I am now the associate director of the Elie Wiesel Center there, which is a real honor. And by the time I was in my own classroom, I really had a chance to reflect, you know, what did I learn from Professor Wiesel? Because, you know, people always ask me, if they find out that I studied with him, they always want to know, what's the most important thing that he taught you? Or, you know, what was so special about him? And I think that still feels in some ways like an impossible question to answer, except that he really taught me just by doing, not by saying. I mean, not in any significant way. It was really by doing that. Your trauma doesn't define you. It's part of who you are. It's inescapably part of who you are, but it doesn't define you. And in fact, it can be a gift. It can be something that you use to make the world better. And, that's an invaluable gift. One thing that I wanted to say about Oren's film, besides the fact that I'm really honored to have been a part of it, is that I love the film. And one of the reasons I love it so much is that he really focuses on Wiesel, the teacher. And that's so important for lots of reasons. One is that, as the film points out, he often said the most important part of what he felt he was doing on the planet was teaching, and that he took that the most seriously. He took the responsibility that he felt he had for his students the most seriously. He treated us like that. He treated us like we were the most important thing. And that does something to you. It makes a difference. You feel seen in a really important way. And I think also that those of us who were lucky enough to work with him at BU or in any academic or kind of intellectual setting, was that we got to see Wiesel the thinker. And that was also something very special about him. Yes, he was an activist, and that was important. And he was a novelist and a playwright, and he wrote, memoirs and all of those things. But he was really a thinker. He was a scholar, in a more sort of traditionally Jewish way, perhaps, since he didn't have a PhD. But that didn't mean he wasn't a scholar. In fact, it kind of made it even more true in a way. Being in the classroom with him and studying the Book of Job, for example, you really could see what a scholar he was, and that he was so just in love with ideas and with stories and just full of wonder. And I think there are times when I feel that wonder and that love for the world, life, knowledge slip away, I try to remember him. So I think Oren really captured that. And Oren, thank you so much. And I think you've made such a wonderful contribution to the work that's been done on Professor Wiesel, precisely because of that you really focused not just on the teaching, but also on the Hasid, on the ways in which he really was his own kind of Hasid. So thank you. And again, I'm sorry that I can't be with you live. I hope that you all enjoy your opportunity to have this wonderful conversation with Oren. And I hope you loved the film as much as I loved being a part of it. And if you do have things you want to ask me, feel free to send me an email. My email address is ila@bu.edu. And again, have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you, Oren, for your beautiful film. Goodbye.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have 10 minutes left until the end of the program. So Judd, please save whatever it is you were going to say. I'm going to briefly make some announcements.
I had many things to say. One thing I'll say very quickly is that Ingrid mentions how teaching was the most important thing and his students were most important. It seems to me that teaching was what he was doing to the public as well. I think we were his students, and we were very important to him. So I don't think it was limited to the classroom. And one other thought that I had, which we can't go into really, but the notion that you can't make a novel about the Holocaust, you mustn't, because it's not going to be about the Holocaust at all. It's a figment of someone's imagination. And this issue of aestheticizing the Holocaust. And I just want to say, I guess I'll just make a statement. Many teachers today know very little about the Holocaust, and they find Night or the Diary of Anne Frank needs too much contextualizing. And so instead they're using young adult novels. And I feel that this is a very, very sorrowful thing to be happening. I don't want that to happen. And none of us in the Holocaust education world approve of this. That's all.
Okay, well, that brings me to my first announcement, which is that we have a book available about our hero, Aristides de Souza Mendes, who saved thousands of lives and paid a very heavy price. The book is called The World Entire. It's got embossed lettering. It's a very fancy, wonderful book for young readers. Please get it. It supports the Souza Mendes Foundation, and it teaches the lessons that one person can make a difference. So we're putting in the chat box a link on how to purchase the book. And in fact, our very next program is going to be a book launch for this book. And that program is on Sunday, November 16th, in 2 weeks' time. It's a free program, so please come. It'll be a nice festive event. And of course, the holidays are coming up, so it's a nice holiday gift. Following that, 2 weeks later, we have our last program of the year. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, is actually our last program of the year. It's called Behind Enemy Lines, the Mart Cohn Story. If any of you read the New York Times, Mart Hoffnung Cohn died a few months ago at age 105. She was a French hero. She was a resistance hero. She was a spy behind enemy lines in Nazi Germany. She spoke fluent German, and she's a delightful character. She's tiny. She's the size of Dr. Ruth. And we did a show on Dr. Ruth, Judd and I. Remember that, Judd?
Yes.
Vous avez quel âge? 96 ans.
96 ans? Eh ben, vous avez du vécu alors.
I am extremely busy because I give talks all over the United States and in Europe.
Chichinette, une espionne au service de la France.
Et a fait parvenir des renseignements militaires du plus grand intérêt qui ont facilité le succès de l'armée française en Forêt-Noire.
Il y a beaucoup de femmes qui étaient résistantes, voire combattantes, et je ne vois aucun nom de femmes sur les monuments aux morts.
Le monument aux morts ne peut pas avoir mon nom, je ne suis pas... J'ai essayé 13 fois de traverser le front. J'étais toute seule. Pour la première fois de ma vie, je vivais sans ma famille. Ma sœur Stéphie, elle a été déportée. Je me suis sentie responsable. Personne ne parlait de la guerre, alors je n'en parlais pas.
She is so gun-ho. It's what drives her and keeps her alive.
What's your message to people today?
I say be engaged and don't accept any order that your conscience could not prove.
Je me permets de vous faire un petit bisou.
Bien sûr. Mon mari n'est pas jaloux.
So anyway, please sign up for those 2 upcoming programs. And also on that last program of the year, you will have a choice between getting a ticket for that program only, or if you like what we do, if you like these programs, get yourself a season ticket for our entire next calendar year of 2026. So for one price, you get the entire season, including that program itself. So it's a very, very good deal, and I encourage all of you to take advantage of it. So now we have just a brief amount of time for audience questions and for some final thoughts. There was a question about the original edition of Night in Yiddish. And the question is that longer edition available in English?
That longer edition is not available. There have been sections that have been translated but you may be able to find them online. But the film discusses the differences, the essential differences between that. One would describe it as much angrier, chastising version, but it was really written for people who could speak Yiddish. That's the main point for Jews. And what Elie did at the behest of Francois Mauriac, who wrote the intro to the film and was a Nobel laureate, Catholic Nobel laureate himself, was to broaden the scope that it could reach Christians and Jews equally, and everybody could learn from that story. I just want to correct one thing Ingrid said, which is the holidays that the deportation happened were not the High Holy Days, but they were from Passover to the holiday of Shavuot in the springtime.
A few of our audience members are picking up on something that I also noticed, wondering if you can comment on it, Oren, that Elie Wiesel speaks about having seen his sister for the last time, that she was wearing a red coat. Did that memory impact Steven Spielberg in his depiction of the girl with the little red coat?
I have not seen Steven Spielberg say that or not, so I can't comment accurately about that. I don't know. It sounds like it, but I don't know.
Are there any more interviews available with his sister Hilda? Somebody wants to know.
That interview with Hilda was a Spielberg Foundation, Shoah Foundation interview that we found in French, obviously, and that's the only known interview with Hilda. And there's unfortunately his other sister who died in Canada did not record an interview. She passed away at a much younger age.
Now, Marion Wiesel died not that long ago. Did she have a chance to see your film?
Yes, and Marion died this past February. In January, the end of January, the film was premiered in New York City at the New York Jewish Film Festival at Lincoln Center. She was there along with these wonderful children from this Newark school, which is featured in the film, which is many people's favorite scene in the film, which speaks to a new generation of young people who study the film. She met them there. She really had a wonderful experience, and she said to me afterwards, Oren, the film makes me sad because it made me fall in love with Elie all over again.
Oh, wow.
Which are words that for a filmmaker could not have pleased me more, even in their pathos. And you know, she really loved the film, and that was wonderful.
So, Oren, I'm going to take that as your final thought, and I'm going to turn the floor now to Judd. Judd, what would you like to say today in closing to our audience?
Well, my final words are actually the words of Elie Wiesel and also of our own Mordecai Paldiel, who, of course, headed the department for choosing who would be the righteous among the nations at Yad Vashem. Elie once said, and I quote, "Let us not forget that after all, there's always a second when a moral choice is made, even in those times when there's dictatorship, the police, and the terror, and people still, paraphrasing now, there are still those who find a way or the need to speak out and do something and choose to risk themselves." And Mordecai says he wants to thank Elie Wiesel for his words in the film that what is important, rather than praying fervently for the Messiah's coming, it is better to pray for having right now a little messianism within our daily lives. And that means helping make the world a better place. Bring the Messiah yourself in your own actions and in your own life.
All right, I'm into that.
Thank you. Fabulous.
So, Oren, thank you for letting us show your beautiful film to our audience. I've been wanting to show it for quite some time. I met you in person at the Cinema Arts Center here on Long Island. We originally were going to show your film 6 months ago. It got pushed. Anyway, here it is. I'm so glad you finally let us. We were finally able to show your film. It's a great film, and I hope you have great success with it. Judd, thanks for everything you do and for moderating today. And audience, see you soon.
And can I just say, eliewieselfilm.com is the website, and you can learn about where it's screening around the country and beyond.
Great. Tell all your friends. So, and join us next summer in Portugal. We'd love to have you. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Be well. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.